Is it safe to come out? Whew. I hope it's safe to come out, you see, because, oh, by the way, welcome to another edition of Liberty Watch. I'm your host, Liberty Man Van. Sorry I've been away for so long. We took a little family vacation and had some other stuff going on, so it's been a while since I talked to you. And a lot has happened. The reason I was ducking for cover there was because, well, just wanted to make sure there weren't any bombs coming. Because last time I talked to you, as a matter of fact, on the very 100th anniversary of America's entry into World War I, Trump bombed a Syrian airfield. Why? Well, because Syria was bombing this rebel position in the civil war that's been going on there, and there were some chemical weapons released, and about dozens of people died, including women and children. Now, the Syrians say, and of course the Russians, the Russians are on Syria's side in that civil war that's been going on there. They say that, no, we didn't gas attack these folks. We were doing a conventional bombing of the rebel position, and there happened to be a cache of chemical weapons there. We accidentally hit it. They were released, and that's what happened. Of course, the mainstream media, they weren't going to buy into that story at all. They jumped straight into the, hey, Assad gassed his people. He did it. He's a monster. And Trump jumped on this bandwagon too. Here's what he had to say.
Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death for so many. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror.
Now, the mainstream media was quick to jump on this, oh, Assad is an evil man who used chemical weapons. They were quick to jump on that. I guess that kind of thing sells newspapers, it sells ads on CNN, Fox News, and so forth. So the mainstream media was quick to jump on that assumption. But there were a few skeptics. In this next clip, we're going to see Representative Thomas Massie, and the CNN reporter just could not believe that he would question the mainstream narrative.
It's hard to know exactly what's happening in Syria right now. I'd like to know specifically how that release of chemical gas, if it did occur, and it looks like it did, how that occurred. Because frankly, I don't think Assad would have done that. It does not serve his interests. It would tend to draw us into that civil war even further.
Who do you think is behind it? Who do you think is behind it?
You know, you've got a war going on over there. Supposedly that airstrike was on an ammo dump, and so I don't know if it was released because there was gas stored in the ammo dump or not. That's plausible. I'm not saying that's what I think happened, but
You're more inclined to believe the position of what Bashar al-Assad is saying and what the Russians are saying right now than more inclined to believe what even your colleagues here in the United States believe is truth, that this is Assad, and what human rights observers over there say is Assad?
I don't think it would have served Assad's purposes to do a chemical attack on his people. So,
in response, Trump ordered an attack on a Syrian air base with cruise missiles. Here's some video clips of him talking about that decision and some video of the cruise missiles.
Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
So here go the cruise missiles targeting the airstrip in Syria, 59 in all. Now, when a similar event happened in 2013, Trump was quick to criticize President Obama for acting too hastily. As a matter of fact, he tweeted about it. Let's look at some of those tweets now. What will we get for bombing Syria besides more debt and a possible long-term conflict? Obama needs congressional approval. If Obama attacks Syria and innocent civilians are hurt and killed, he and the U.S. will look very bad. If the U.S. attacks Syria and hits the wrong targets, killing civilians, there will be worldwide hell to pay. Stay away and fix broken U.S. What I'm saying is stay out of Syria. Again, to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen, and from that fight, the U.S. gets nothing. Russia is sending a fleet of ships to the Mediterranean. Obama's war in Syria has the potential to widen into a worldwide conflict. We should stop talking, stay out of Syria and other countries that hate us, rebuild our own country, and make it strong and great again. USA. I'm not saying that Assad is a saint. I'm not saying that he didn't order the chemical weapons attack. All I'm saying is that when Trump made his decision, we didn't have all the facts. So we were reacting without having all the facts in. That's all I'm saying. And in addition, why is it always our responsibility to be the policeman of the world when some bad guy does something bad? Why is that always our responsibility? Another aspect of this story I wanted to comment on was you kind of wonder in the back of your head, because ever since the election, the Democrats have been accusing Trump of being in cahoots with the Russians. They've accused him of being a little bit too friendly with Putin. And you wonder if Trump might have been a little bit of trigger happy here to show that he wasn't in the back pocket of Putin. Now, there's one funny aspect of this story that arose, and that involved the extreme left-wing, rabid left-wing commentator Rachel Maddow. When this story broke, they preempted her show to go to Brian Williams to show the live coverage of what was going on. And boy, her social justice warrior base just almost exploded with rage. How could CNBC do such a sexist thing? That's right. As you can see from the headline, Rachel Maddow fans were not happy when she was replaced by Brian Williams because of this cruise missile attack. It didn't matter that Brian Williams is normally the breaking news guy. Never mind that all the other networks also, when this story broke, preempted their regularly scheduled programming to go straight to the breaking news. That didn't matter to these leftists. Now, it seems that every time they get a chance, they want to holler sexist, racist, homophobe, xenophobe. I mean, how many times have you heard this from the left? By now, it should be like the boy who cried wolf. Who believes them anymore? And this is ridiculous, but this is the type of thing that these folks get all uptight about. Now, let's get back to the sarin gas story again. And one of the questions that any reasonable people are asking here is, why would Assad order a chemical gas attack? It just doesn't make a lot of sense because, by the way, we never got definitive proof that he was behind the attack in 2013. And what incentive does he have to do it today? I mean, he's winning the Civil War. That tide has turned in his favor. And the last thing he would want is to have the United States get involved. And how would you pull the United States into this conflict? Well, maybe a chemical gas attack might do it, right? So there just doesn't make sense at this point in time that he would do it. Now, Trump and our Secretary of State had just made, a few days before this, had just made a statement to the effect that, hey, we're going to have to live with the effect, just live with the fact that Assad is in power. Here were those statements.
The status and the longer term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people.
It didn't take long for the usual suspects to say, hey, United States, let's make them pay.
So, Senator, what do you want to see President Trump do?
I want to hear him say, we're going to arm the Free Syrian Army. We are going to dedicate ourselves to the removal of Bashar Assad. We're going to have the Russians pay a price for their engagement. The Iranians and Hezbollah are also heavily involved. All players here are going to have to pay a penalty.
So you need more American troops to accelerate the demise of ISIL. We're relying too much on the Kurds. More American forces, 5,000 or 6,000.
I was encouraged to see that not everybody, particularly some of Trump's supporters during his presidential campaign, they weren't totally ecstatic about this move to bomb Syria. And as a matter of fact, one of the main conservatives that supported him, Ann Coulter, had this to say.
But the magnitude of this Syrian meddling, the magnitude of this catastrophe cannot be underestimated. I've had a knot in my stomach seeing, since he's been filling up his administration with these warmongers. But the main point is, as he said over and over and over again, including in that beautiful State of the Union address, including, I believe, in his inauguration address, he is running to be president of America, not to be president of the world.
Is this here we go again? I can assure you he has some folks around him that have his ear, some neoconservatives that are going, regime change, regime change. This is our opportunity to get rid of Assad. Go, go. I hope Trump doesn't go for it. I hope that during the presidential campaign, where he criticized our foreign policy and talked about what a disaster it had been, he was correct when he talked about going into Iraq and taking out Hussein has been a disaster. All we have is chaos over there now. And how about Libya? We took out Gaddafi. What have we got there now? We've got these African migrants going into Libya and going to the northern coast of Libya, and by the thousands crossing the channel there into Europe. So that's what's happened since we took out Gaddafi in Libya. Our foreign policy in the Middle East has been a complete disaster. But does anyone ever stand up and say, hey, you know, we might be making a mistake here. Maybe it was a mistake taking out the leader in Libya. Maybe it was a mistake going into Iraq. Well, Trump said that during his campaign, but now that he's president, it's just something about once you get into that office and these entrenched folks that are around the presidency start getting his ear. And I'm going to be honest with you, he surrounded himself with so many neoconservative types in his administration now as regards to his foreign policy. I think Steve Bannon was not in favor of this, and he's been ousted from the national security inner circle. I think he disagreed with this, and that may be the reason he's gone now from that circle. And it just doesn't look like Trump's moving in the right direction. So here's my prediction, and I sure hope I'm wrong. I think he's going to get us more and more involved in the Middle East with more troops, more weapons, more spending. It seems to never end. And gee, I hope I'm wrong about this one. We'll see. And now for a little libertarian humor. Do you ever wonder what a libertarian Jesus would look like? And the libertarian Jesus caption reads, I told you to feed the poor and not create laws that steal from people to do it. And here's another scene from the libertarian Jesus. This one falls under the category of things Jesus never said. Blessed are the tax collectors, for true charity comes not from the heart, but through the glory of government confiscation. Let's go on to the next topic, health care reform. And as you'll recall, I predicted in our last episode that the Republican attempted replacement for Obamacare, the American Health Care Act, I attempted that it would crash and burn. The results are in, and here's what that looked like. President Trump had campaigned that if he were elected, he would repeal and replace Obamacare. And during the election, I was disappointed when I would hear him in a debate and he would say, we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. What I really wanted him to say, from a libertarian perspective, is people should make their own choices and you shouldn't cram your choices down their throat. And that's what Obamacare does. It forces people to buy health insurance. If not, they get penalized. So what I wanted to hear him say during the campaign was just plain, oh, I'm going to repeal Obamacare. But he said repeal and replace, and so he's trying to get that done now to keep one of his campaign promises. So he wasn't real happy with the Freedom Caucus. That's who it was a Republican group that torpedoed this bill, not the Democrats. Republicans had the votes to get it through if they'd just all voted together. But there was a group in the House. They're called like I say, the Freedom Caucus. It's about 30 House members, and they they didn't think this bill went far enough. Like me, they thought it looked too much like Obamacare. You know, it just looked like Obamacare Part 2 or Obamacare Light. So this Freedom Caucus is what defeated the bill. And disappointingly, instead of going after the moderate Republicans like Ryan, instead of going after the rhinos, Republicans in name only, or those who want to repeal in name only, that has a double meaning now, doesn't it? Instead of going after the moderate group and saying, look, let's get a more freedom-like result here. Let's move it in our direction. And, instead of going after the moderates, Trump goes after the Freedom Caucus, saying that, hey, they need to come around, and even implying that they would go and try to get them unseated in the Republican primary next time around. So that was disappointing. On a positive note, since then, it looks like they're trying to reintroduce this bill, and looks like they are going to be adding some provisions that move it closer to what the Freedom Caucus wanted. And as a matter of fact, I did get a sneak peek at at least one of the provisions that looks like they're going to do away with the pre-existing conditions mandate. And as I've said all along, unless you get rid of that mandate, this thing's going to be just like Obamacare. You have to keep the rest of the provisions to keep the thing from completely falling apart. So it does, on a positive note, it looks like they're going to try to reintroduce that legislation and move more towards what the Freedom Caucus wanted. So that's a good thing. And the final thing I wanted to point out about this whole debate so far is that it just kind of shows you the Republicans, they don't go far enough to the right. When they're introducing legislation, they need to carve out a position way over to the right to give themselves some negotiating room. Instead, this was kind of a centrist bill they were trying to get passed through, and it's because it was too centrist that some of the Republicans rejected it. Now contrast this with when the Democrats have control of the House and the Senate. I mean, they start with the bill with a really extreme position, and just cram it down your throat. The Republicans are just not as good at negotiating. They seem to get outmaneuvered every time by the Democrats. And that's about all I wanted to say about the American Health Care Act. Our next story is a lesson about economics from the island of Puerto Rico. But before we get into the specifics of that, let's talk a little bit about the island of Puerto Rico. It's a U.S. territory, and the Spanish controlled the island until 1898. As you'll recall, that's when the Spanish-American War started. So part of that was the Spanish were in control of Puerto Rico at that time. We went in and pushed them out. And President Roosevelt at that time, well, not at that time, but later on, Roosevelt appointed this guy named Rex Tugwell as governor in 1941. And he would serve in that position until 1946. Now, Tugwell was in FDR's inner circle, and he was part of what that FDR called his brain trust. And these were a group of Columbia University professors that he brought in during his administration to help him run things. So this guy Tugwell was a part of that group. Now, we'll come back to him in just a minute. But now let's fast forward to present day Puerto Rico. It's on the verge of bankruptcy. It has double-digit unemployment, which hasn't been below 9.7% in over 40 years. Its per capita debt is 4 times that of Detroit. And in case you haven't heard, Detroit went belly up. It's bankrupt. That's right. It was another one of those give the store away socialist paradises. Now, back to Puerto Rico. Almost half of the island's 3.7 million residents live below the poverty line. And I've said this before, I'll say it again, the more of something that you subsidize, the more you get. So the more poverty you subsidize, the more you're going to get. And here's another example of it. Nearly 40% of households are on food stamps there. Now, you're going to love this next one. Talk about giving away the store. Until recently, the retirement age for government school teachers was as low as 47 years old. Yeah, work 20 years, retire. Great gig, huh? 25 years maybe. Now, back to our Professor Rex Tugwell. He directed the island away from its natural competitive advantage. And competitive advantage means just basically one country may have a natural advantage of producing some good versus another. And so, for example, a Caribbean island in this case, they were good at producing sugar cane and coffee. Well, what does the genius Columbia professor come in and do? Well, he decides that he would change them from a focus on agriculture, and they needed to go into manufacturing. So he shifted their focus into manufacturing. So much for the thriving coffee and sugarcane industry. Now, he lobbied for all the aid and welfare he could to come from Washington, D.C., of course, and that set the tone for decades to come. Now, after he quit in 1946 or 7, other New Dealers would come to the island after he left and offer more of the same, a highly regulated business environment and more welfare. So just remember these lessons from Puerto Rico and Detroit, and the next time you hear a politician say, I want to give you some free stuff. It's not free, and it always ends poorly. These welfare states always end poorly. It's like British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. Well, that's the show for today. I'm glad you could join us. Tell a friend about us. We've got you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And since I last saw you, I've actually got my blog up and running. You can go to libertymanvan.com to look at that. That's all one word, Liberty Man Van. So that's just a synopsis of the videos that I do, so you can get the quick version of them. And it also has links to get to the videos. So be sure to spread the word, and thanks for joining us. See you next time.